I was born to run, I was born to travel. It's another day alive, raising hell and slanging gravel.
Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. And in today's episode I've got something a little bit unique for you. I ended up coming out and starting the General Lee, and he made this noise here. Now, it didn't do that the time before. I'd driven it all weekend, a Friday and a Saturday. That happened on a Sunday. And, you know, it just came out of nowhere. So I had some friends help me. We tried to diagnose it. Even reached out to the guys for B-Bodies only. If you guys haven't signed up for that form online, that's probably, if you own a Charger or a B-Body at all, B-Body Mopar they call them, you need to do that and sign up. It's free. And those guys over there are amazing. Absolute experts on this thing. So anyway, we reached out, did some testing, and it seems like it was going to be the exhaust flange gasket. So that's where, as you can see here, where the exhaust pipe bolts up to the bottom of the exhaust manifold, not where the exhaust manifold bolts to the side of the engine. There is no gasket from the cylinder head to the exhaust manifolds from the factory, but there is one at the exhaust flange where that connects. And so that's what I'm going to show you how to replace in this video, because let me tell you, it was a patience trying exercise. It definitely was. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever done on this car. Now, having said that, now that I know, it's pretty easy. I could do it again pretty easy, but at first it was very difficult. And first of all, the tools you'll need is probably some PB blaster, as I've showed here, or some type of penetrating oil to break loose the bolts, because mine were rusted and have been, you know, haven't been apart in probably 20-30 years. So you probably need to do that, let it soak for several days like I did before you do this. You also need a 3/8 drive and a 1/2 inch drive ratchet set with a 9/16 socket. So as you can see here, there's two bolts, and there's also two nuts, all of which are 9/16. So you'll have to have two wrenches and two ratchets. And I even use this double extension. I'll show you this in just a minute. I use two extensions together to be able to break this loose, just because of the room. It's very difficult to get into this tight spot. And but anyway, I'll show you what I did as we go along. But those are the tools you'll need. And also an optional tool is a bench grinder with like a polishing wheel or a wire wheel or something like that on it, like you can see here. I've got an old one my neighbor Owen gave me that he found and got a long time ago. It works great. So I just use that to clean the bolts and the nuts up and the washers up after I got them off there and broke them loose. That way, hopefully I won't have that problem in the future. But anyway, let's get into this one. I'll show you what I did, and I'm also going to give you a spoiler alert. This did not solve the problem. So I don't know what's wrong with the General Lee still, but let's get started. All right, so before I get into what I did to get this taken care of, I do want to talk to you about the prerequisite stuff we did. So my cousin Josh, who's my brother from another mother, him and our friend Kenny came over, and they helped me try to diagnose this and see what was wrong, because that noise, I was scared to death it was a lifter going bad, or it was like a rocker arm or something like that, which would have been much better than a lifter, but still something problematic internal to the engine or whatever. So we went through some troubleshooting steps, and we ended up taking the valve cover off, and then we checked the rocker arm assembly and lifters and push rods and all that checked out fine. So then we held a piece of cardboard between the exhaust manifold and the cylinder head with the valve cover off to keep the oil from splashing all over the place. And I started the car, and there was no noise. There was just it didn't make the noise anymore. So we thought, well, man, it's got to be hitting that valve cover. So we put the valve cover back on it, started it, still making the noise. And, you know, they had like a stethoscope for lack of better terms, but it didn't have a round thing on the end. It was just like a doctor's would. It just came to a point, and you would touch that on any point on the car, and you can hear the noise and see if something's, slamming up against the valve cover, and you couldn't hear anything slamming up against the valve cover. But when you would put that on the exhaust manifold, you hear all kinds of chatter. I mean, all kinds of chatter. It's really loud. Um, so I put out some feelers on the 4B bodies only forum, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And like again, these guys are great. Huge help if you need help on these things and troubleshooting things. But anyway, and almost every one of them unanimously said exhaust flange gasket. So that's what I did. That's what I bought. And then I ended up waiting on it to get here. And then I ended up taking some steps to try to get that changed out. And that's what I'd like to go over with you now. All right. So the first thing I did, I've already kind of hinted at earlier, is um I'd say for 3 days in a row, I went out and twice a day I sprayed the top and bottom of this bolt at the exhaust flange. There's one on each side. Um, and I sprayed these with the PB blaster to try to help break this loose because this was extremely difficult. The hardest part was getting these broke loose. But once I figured it out, it wasn't that bad. But I think that penetrating oil is definitely something you need to do first over a couple of days. You can try it without it because yours may not be as rusted as bad as mine was or been on there as long. So, or it could even be worse. I mean, I've heard horror stories about these breaking those off and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, um, that's step one is to just spray that and let that soak. Now, step two is fairly obvious as well, and that's breaking the bolts loose. And this was very difficult, at least for me, because again, I'm going to say this all the time. I'm not a mechanic and I don't play one on YouTube. And there's reasons for that. It's just because I'm ignorant and I have no experience, but I'm working on it. And I'm definitely getting it working on the General E for sure. But yeah, this was very difficult just because the space you're really confined and it's very difficult to get leverage on these wrenches, on these ratchets and everything to break these loose, especially when they've been on there this long. But what I actually finally figured out after trying wrenches on both ends, on the bolt and on the nut, um, what ended up working is I took the 3/8 drive, put an extension on it, and put a second extension on it. And this is for if you're on the passenger side of the car, looking at the engine, leaning over into the engine bay. There's two bolts. There's one on the left and one on the right on this exhaust flange connection. And the one on the left is the bolt I'm talking about. And here's what I ended up doing. I ended up putting two extensions together and then putting that onto the 9/16 socket. And that way I had leverage up at the top to move the wrench to where I have enough room to do it. And that way I wasn't at an awkward angle leaning into the car with number one, no leverage. And number two, um, I was at a much better angle to apply more force. So before I did that though, before I pushed on it, I ended up taking this off. You guys may not have this problem because you may have normal bolts holding the valve covers on, but we've got these old school valve cover studs, I guess they call them. And I took this off because I did not want to bust my knuckles on this. So I moved this first. Now that that's out of the way, then I was able to lean over and apply enough torque to actually bust this thing loose. Now, it was very, very difficult and time consuming. It wasn't like I just broke it loose and then it all came apart really easy. No, I had to do this in phases. I broke it loose and then I even had to spray a little bit more penetrating oil on it, walk away for 15, 20 minutes, come back out, try it again, move it some more, and so on. I repeated that process like 4 times and finally got this off. And I even had to try to put a wrench on the bottom of it and even another ratchet. I tried another ratchet, I tried another wrench, and I went back and forth trying to see what was best. Finally,
I got it loose, and I got the bolt and nut off there. So then I had to go to the second one, and this one was a little bit more different, a little bit more difficult in the sense that there's less room to work with. And I mean, I tried everything to get this one loose. I put towels down, down inside the car because they make gloves that'll pad the top of your hand and your knuckles and everything, so you don't bust your knuckles on stuff. But I don't have a pair of them, and I didn't want to go buy a pair. I probably eventually will. But anyway, so I don't want to bust my knuckles. So I found this blue towel that's laying around. So I just stuffed it down in there. That way, if I did break it loose, I didn't bust my knuckles and bust my hand open because that's no fun for anybody. That's definitely not fun. I've done it before a long time ago, and I try to avoid that whenever I can. So, but I ultimately just I tried to bust it loose from the bottom and just have a wrench on the top of it, and that seemed to help. Now I did bust it loose from the top first, and here's how it looked. You can see there's not much room here at all, and I just did everything I could to get this loose, and it was more difficult because of the not being able to use that extension to get that extra leverage like I did on the other one. But I did eventually get this broken loose. I had to do the exact same thing on this one as I did the other one. Namely, I broke it loose, and then I would get it to a certain point, then I'd have to put more penetrating oil on it, then I'd have to come back to it. Then I'd have to do it again and again and again and again till finally I had to use two ratchets, even a wrench at one point. I tried everything again. And finally, alternating between those, I finally got this off. And then I was actually able to install, as you see here, this shiny new exhaust flange gasket. And thankfully, when I got this broken loose, this is exactly how it sat when it come loose. It didn't drop down any further or lean any further. So I was just actually able to set the gasket right on top of the exhaust pipe that was coming up to meet the manifold. So it was real easy. Then, thankfully, I was able to clean the bolts up and the washers and the nut and everything with the bench grinder type tool that I showed you, like a wire wheel on it. So I took that to it and cleaned them up. And, they're going to rust again. But, this way I got them all cleaned up and got the threads really good. And I think they turned out really good. And also, this way, when I put them back on, the thread, it was very difficult. It would catch at different points when I was loosening it up. And it's probably because all the gunk and the rust and junk down there. So I got all that off there using this wire wheel, and again got them cleaned up, and they turned out good, and it went together much smoother. It felt like it was new when I was putting this together. So I would definitely recommend, if you've got that as an option, to do that. If your bolts and everything are in the shape mine's in, this definitely helped mine. So it went back together very smooth. So then I just put everything back together. I put the bolts in place and got the nuts on the bottom, and then the gasket stayed in place because the bolts were in place, as you can see here. And I mean, it just went together much smoother. Now, I do want to show you guys a cool little trick I learned. This may hopefully help you out if you have to do this yourself. So I'm zooming in here. You can see the wrench I've got there. I'm going to put the ratchet on here. And when I turn the ratchet, once you get this on here, you can see how the wrench will actually turn too. So it'll move the wrench also to the right whenever I tighten it. So when you get it on here, you can turn it, see how the wrench moves with it. Eventually, the wrench will go all the way over and rest against the block and stay there. And I thought, well, man, that's great. I don't even have to hold this down because it's very difficult to get in here, very awkward. But what I found is you want to push this over here and you want to hold that there and then tighten it. Now, you want to try to get in here with your other hand and hold the wrench while you tighten it with the ratchet. So I've got the wrench on the head of the bolt, and then I've got the ratchet, of course, on the nut on the bottom, and now I'm tightening it. The reason being, if you let that go all the way up against the engine block and then tighten it, your wrench is going to be stuck up against the engine block. So anyway, that's just a quick tip, and I hope that helps you out.
So, as you can see, this was a very frustrating thing, and it didn't even fix the problem. So stay tuned in the future. I don't know how quick I'll get to this, but I'll still have some videos. It may take me a little while to think this through and get back with you guys and let you know what the solution was to this problem. But the exhaust flange gasket needed changed anyway, because as you saw in the video, it basically disintegrated. There wasn't one there at all anyway. So anyway, I'm gonna do some more checking, some more thinking, and get back to it and see if I can figure it out. But again, I'm not a mechanic, nor do I play one on YouTube. But I am a guy who has a car, who's trying to learn how to work on it and study all I can, research all I can, and pass all that on to you guys, and hopefully it helps. And don't forget to check out some of these other videos we've done. And until next time, keep it between the ditches.